Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome. And let's start. I get very excited every time I'm preparing one of these classes. And the one thing that gets you super excited is to be able to talk about the portion with you guys. I mean, I know I have to prepare stuff, but I'm super interested to hear what are you guys getting out of this. It's following the portions. It's so, I'm sure you have experienced this, like, it's life-giving. But then you start making a connection, and then it becomes a pattern. And you're seeing, like, the thread, and like I mentioned last week, I said, I'm going to start saying I love pre-game, pre-battles. Now I'm going to start by saying I love stories. I really love stories. So when this new marketing thing came, like, oh, you gotta sell by storytelling, I'm like all in. Like, what do you want us to do? Like, yeah, stories are just amazing. Stories are amazing. Last week Emma and I had the privilege to teach what were 9 and 10, right? 9 and 10, and we were sharing a portion, and after the Shema, he says, like, and when your kids ask you, and I shared that little piece, and I told the kids, remember these two words, questions and stories. Not questions and answers. Because if you read that part, and we just went through it last week, it says, when your kids ask you why, you tell them, because we were in, it starts with a story. I don't know about you guys, but when you were kids, how was your parents and your teachers? When you ask a question, did they give you like a, why is this like that? And boom, a short answer. Or did they went through a story like, well, let me explain you. You know, this happens because like, or a story. And I was not giving a lot of answers. One, you didn't approach that much to an adult to be asking all your questions. You asked your friends or the stars or something, but you didn't approach too much. And when you did, you get a short answer. And don't press it too much because you're gonna get another kind of answer that you're not wanting. Right? Am I getting some echo? So, or when I hear this, like, a story. Oh, stories make so much sense. But why? Why do humanity like so much stories? Why do we get engaged with stories? I mean, look at the movies, novels, books. We're drawn to them. There's something about it. Even their fiction or non-fiction is like, tell me something. I like drama movies. Do you like that category, that genre? My wife's like, why in the world are we going like to select something that we're gonna cry about? Like, no, play something like comedy or science fiction. That's her two genres. Like, either it's super fantasy or it's comedy. And I like drama. I like real life thing. And now because of her, I have been drawn into science fiction too. But stories are amazing. I've been drawn, and there's one book that John Eldredge wrote called Epic. I don't know if you have heard about this. But basically, I'm going to give you a super short summary. He makes a statement that all stories are connected to the grand story of the Lord. And that's why we get caught up. That's why Marvel and comics and all these things are like, why there's always a hero, villain, there's always glory and there's always pain. What, like, these elements, why are we creating a God out of these? Or it's all of this reflection of the great story, and that's why it's so needed into our DNA. And I want to read this super short. Niñas, silencio, por favor. And I want to read the prologue. It's not all the prologue, just the first two chapters. Because it starts with a Lord of the Rings section. So let's start with that. It says, it's been quite a journey for Frodo and Sam when the little gardener wondered this. Ever since they left home, they have encountered more wonders and more dangers than they could have possibly imagined. The battle on Weathertop, the flight to the fort, the beauty of Rivendell, the dark mines of Moria, where they lost their beloved Gandalf. Their fellowship has fallen apart. Their friends are now far of Mordor, far away on another part of the journey. Into the shadow of Mordor they have come. Two little hobbits on their cooking gear on a journey to save the world. It is at this point Sam says, I wonder what sort of tale we have fallen into. Sam could not have asked a better question. He assumes there is a story. There is something larger going on. He also assumes that they have somehow tumbled into it, been swept up into it. What sort of tale have I fallen into? It's a question that will help us all a great deal if we wonder it for ourselves. It just might be the most important question we ever ask. And you can find this on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever you want, if you want to keep reading. But I love that. What story are we in? Is it the story of our lives? If you go to Barnes & Nobles, you'll find a lot of books tell you like, this is the story of your life. Keep writing or interpret it. Or, this is about your life. You see a tombstone, and what does it say? Name, year, dash, year. What is it all about most of the time? The person. When a baby gets born, it says, welcome, your life has just begun. Welcome to your story. But what if when a baby arrives, we can tell the baby, welcome to the great story of the Lord. I hope you find your part quickly and you engage fully into his grand story. Just think about it.
Wonderful, yes.
I used to thought that when you grow up, you figure out everything. Oh, how far I was from the truth. I have been able to talk with a lot of people, 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old, 70 years old. And it's like, I want to know what is the purpose of my life. And I feel drawn to say, like, how well do you understand the grand story? I don't know if I shared this before, but before going into the course and all that, I studied psychology. So it's something that I really like also. My father is a psychologist. It's something that I really like to understand. I believe I did enter psychology because I was trying to understand myself, but when you study somebody or human behavior, it's easy to see life like in scenes, like part one, part two. Part one, like childhood, grew up. Part two, for example, in my life, I used to see like childhood. And then 50 years old, divorce, and that was another chapter. And then this one, and that's when I move out of the house at 19, and then when I get lost, and finally at 25, get to the Lord, and you see it like in big chapters. But if I just keep that in my whiteboard, in my mind, I'm not getting the big picture. And as we go through specifically to this book, Deuteronomy. There we go. So in Spanish is Deuteronomio. So
That's cool.
super differently. It gets complicated. But particularly this book, because it's like a summary speech and it's going through everything. It's like, oh, this is a big storybook. That's why it's one of my favorite books in the Old Testament. Like, oh, it's so full of meat. But in this week portion, we got another chapter. It's one of my favorites, Acts 7. In Acts 7 is Stephen's great speech. That is also a big summary about what? His life? About Yeshua's life, I'm sure. No. about the great grand story. So that's kind of the big outline, not outline, just like the big box we're gonna be diving in to see this portion. Keep in mind that the big story, the epic story. In the congregation I used to work, the youth group was a very large youth group. And they were young, they had their own slangs and all that, and suddenly they started using epic for everything. And I had a problem for that because it was like, no, if you start using epic for everything, then it's not epic anymore. Right. It's just another way to say it is cool, but it's not epic. Epic or legendary. You start saying like, so they will take a picture of one of their friends doing a drush or something like that. It's like, legend. It's like, actually, it's a little far from legend yet. I hope he gets to become a legend, but it's far. But this, oh my goodness, this is epic. So let's dive in. Deuteronomy. There you go. Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verse 12. We're going to start. I don't usually like to read the subtitles of any Bible, but I cannot avoid reading it either. So I just try to ignore it. But sometimes I'm like, okay, today you got me. I like it. Miguel Platt proved. If they were looking for that one. But this one started by saying, Adonai desires to bless. I'm like, oh, you got me there. And he says, then it will happen as a result of your listening to these ordinances. When you keep and do them, and Adonai your God will keep you the covenant kindness that he will keep you the covenant kindness that he swore to your fathers. Verse 13, he will love you, bless you, and multiply you. He will also bless the fruit of your womb and the produce of your soil, your grain and your new wine and your oil, the increase of your herds and the young of your flock, in the land that he swore to your fathers to give you. From all peoples you will be blessed. There will not be male or female barren among you or your livestock. Adonai will remove sickness from you, and he will not inflict on you any of the terrible diseases of Egypt that you knew, but will inflict them on all who hate you. Let's pause. If you just read this, what is he talking about? Israel. Right? The people of Israel. But if we read it with a wider lens, the words he is actually proclaiming have a very strong connection with another chapter of the Bible. You recognize where he's talking about. Several ones, actually. Two in particular come to my mind, probably more. But go to verse 13. It says, he gives a progression. He will love you, and I put that one in there, bless you, multiply you, and bless the fruit of your womb and produce. Where do we hear that kind of love, bless, multiply, fruitful?
Abraham and covenant.
Abraham, and then in before, can you go earlier? The garden. I love it. I see this and I'm like, this is creation. Again. Adam and Eve, it's actually the same story. He loved them before the foundation of the earth. Then he blessed them, before even telling them to multiply and be fruitful, he blessed them, and then he commanded to be multiply and to be fruitful. We know what happened there. But then Israel is being called out to be the instrument that the Lord will use for redemption of the world. And what does he give? He reconnects them to a bigger story. He reconnects them to their fathers, all the way to Adam. And I love this. I used to teach an Old Testament course back in Monterey, and we did it through the covenants. In every class, I will get a whiteboard and do some drawings just to make like a plan, like a route. And I always start with Adam. And that was the first one. And then make a line and go through Abraham. And then start going all the way that we get to our time. And when you're able to make a line all the way to our time, suddenly you find yourself in there. And Israel is getting connected to all the way to Adam, where we have Genesis 3:15 that says, and I will put animosity between your seed and the seed of the woman. You will bite his heel, but he will crush your head. And from that point, we start looking for the seed, right? And the seed eventually comes to Abraham. In Genesis 12, what you were saying, Abrahamic covenant, it talks about, I'll make you a nation, a great nation. I will bless you. I'll be with you. I'll give you a name. I'll bless those who bless you, and I'll curse those who curse you. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Suddenly, this seed is progressing into this nation. It's going to come out of this nation. And he's making that connection. He will love you, bless you, multiply you, and make you fruitful. From all peoples you will be blessed. There will be a distinction. You are a nation called among the nations. So we're getting this big narrative again. It says, verse 16, you will devour all the peoples Adonai your God gives over you. Your eye is not to pity them. You are not to serve their gods. They're being called to be faithful, loyal. 18 says, you're not to be afraid of them. You are to be sure to remember what Adonai your God did to Pharaoh in Egypt. Verse 21, you should not be terrified of them, since Adonai your God is in your midst, a great and awesome God. Adonai God will drive away those nations before you little by little, in a process. You will not be able to put an end to them all at once, or else the beasts of the field will multiply on you. So, what can we get from this first chapter? I see the connection to the big story. They call out of the nation, out of the nations. But also it's giving them a very specific instruction. You will see some stuff with your eyes that will make you feel afraid. And I want you to remember, that's one thing, and to remain faithful. Remember and be faithful. Remember and be faithful. Those two words are huge. Remember and be faithful. Honestly, I like the military culture and the phrases and all that. I love it. I use it personally. All the encouragement quotes and all that. But in here, it's actually a chapter that we don't get the Hazak, be strong. It's saying, remember and be faithful. Yes, you're gonna have to be very strong to do actually that, to remember and be faithful. But I love how he transitioned to chapter 8, which obviously he didn't know he was transitioning chapters. It says, you are to take care to do the whole mitzvah that I'm commanding you today, so that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land that Adonai swore to your fathers. You are to remember all the way that Adonai your God has led you these 4 years in the wilderness, in order to humble you, to test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you keep his mitzvah or not. He afflicted you and let you hunger. Then he fed you manna, which neither you nor your fathers had known, in order to make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Adonai. So I want to pause there. We're talking about being faithful, to remember and be faithful, to remember and do. But then he remembers them. A very important thing. Ultimately, I said this last week, ultimately, the foundation, what makes this something that is going to last, is his faithfulness. So you got to remember when you were hungry, And basically, you have nothing to sustain you. How do they God sustain? By God. By divine providence. So it's on me. A few chapters later, he's going to start saying, like, watch out, don't think it's on you. Remember manna. Were you able to gather some stuff to do some sowing? And no. We're just giving food from the heavens. That is amazing. That's amazing. So basically, he's telling them, he is faithful in our victories, but also in our losses. Trust him. And I think this is huge. This is something that I've been meditating lately, going through history, a lot of history. In the past 2 weeks, I was into Japanese history and going through the story of Christianity and persecution in the 16th century, and how most of that story is narrated into an apostate, how do you say that? Apostate, that they left the faith.
They're an apostate.
Apostate. Oh, okay.
That's fine. That's good.
You're good.
Okay.
We got you.
Most of the story is connected like, oh, most of the church left.
Yeah.
There you go. That's gonna be
There you
easy.
go.
Yeah.
But did they? I mean, they went through hard stuff. Hard stuff. I was reading, and parallel to this, without planning, I'm going through a big history book and got to the part when more like 2nd, 3rd century, something like that, when they were dealing the council, one of the biggest problems is, what do we do with the people that have left but now want to return? How do we treat them? And in our eyes are like with open arms. But for one moment I was able to put it in their feet and I'm like, what if you saw all your family being murdered by persecution? Because they hold their grounds for their faith. And then this guy that just said like, no, I'll curse him and I'll just save my life. And next week he's like, hey guys, forgive me, I want to rejoin. How would you feel for a moment? Because when I was going through that book, I was like, that's too harsh. Like, not allowing people to re-enter. But going through all of this, it took me several days of engaging, and sometimes I took one position, sometimes I put the other one, but eventually I noticed something. I was putting all my chips into the person. When the case is that faithfulness relies on God, and He is definitely more gracious than I am. He's definitely more forgiving than I am. Because He's the only one that truly knows the heart. And He's not afraid to tell a thief on the cross, today I'll see you in paradise. Or we'll say, like you said, with open arms, come back to a Peter that has openly said, I don't know this man. I think I've never pondered on that too much. On the reintegration. I'm like, all disciples left and run. But again, he's going here before everything starts. We're going to this pre-battle, pre-quest speech. He said, like, trust in me even when you fail. Because when we fail, we either said, we are unredeemable, or He is incapable. And we just step out of His covering. But actually, we are redeemable, and He is capable. So remember manna. That's what I'm making the connection. Remember the manna. He is faithful. Wow. Verse 10, so you will eat and be full, and you will bless Adonai your God for the good land He has given you. Take care that you do not forget. Verse 14, then your heart will be haughty, and you will forget Adonai your God. Ooh. Verse 17, I'm making a point here. You may say in your heart, my power and my might of my hands has made me well. Rather, you are to remember Adonai, your God, for it is He who gives you power to make well, in order to establish His covenant that He swore to your fathers, as it is this day. So when you get a promise that you will be fruitful and multiply, and you will not be sick, but you will be head, and you will be... Oh, you must have these warnings. You must have these warnings. It's like giving an inheritance to your children without education or training. That will be disastrous, I'll tell you. Disastrous. When I was in high school, I won't say his name because this is live stream, but one of my, a classmate, he was the son of a very famous political figure in Mexico. And when he died, he left a humongous inheritance. Humongous. Which he was managed for him because of his age. But it was when we were in high school that he reached the age that he received inheritance. And I'm not going to a lot of details, but I'll tell you, in less than 2 years, he was completely lost and destroyed. I hope the Lord has reached him. But it's amazing, the speed of destruction. Going again to Lord of the Rings, it's kind of that scene where the dragon says, I kind of feeling of giving actually this treasure just to see how his heart gets destroyed. Oh, you hear that scene, it's like... And this is kind of what we're seeing here. You're going to have vineyards that you never plant. You're going to get water from wells you never dug. It's like, what? We need to have our hearts aligned. And I'm going to make a parenthesis in here and bring it very down to earth to us in particular. When we hear about these stories of wealth and being like this, we could be tempted to think like, oh, well, I don't have to deal with that. I'm not that rich. But actually, we are. Worldwide talking, we are. So, I think this warning comes to us too, in a good way. We need to constantly realign our hearts. Where is my heart at? Is it by my might or is it by His? In order to fulfill their role. What is at stake in here is not just their hearts, it's their role in the grand story. So let's continue. Chapter 9, this gets very cool. Hear, O Israel, you're about to cross over the Jordan today to go and dispossess nations greater and mightier than yourself. Cities great and fortified up to the heavens. The people are great and tall, sons of the Anakim, the giants. You know them, and you yourself have heard. Who can stand before the son of Anak? But you will know today that Adonai your God is the one who is crossing over before you as a devouring fire. What is going to happen here? We just changed scenes. What is he talking about? We're about to engage in a cosmic war. The same way they experienced Egypt, which was not just a fight about Moses and Aaron and Pharaoh. No. It was a cosmic war. Now they're going to be facing with God a bigger battle in order to get the land. It's because it says on verse 4 at the end, it's because of the wickedness of these nations that Adonai is driving them out from before you. It is not by your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you're going to possess their land. What is he doing again? A recheck, heart check. I have a big plan, and that's why you are participating. Oh, how easy it is to confuse gifts and talents and success using them with the health of our heart. We have seen ministers using their talents and gifts, oh yeah, in a big way, and being a blessing to thousands and thousands and thousands. Yet their life is collapsing inside. So we gotta remember, we're engaged in a bigger story. Why do you have this gift? What are gifts given for? What are roles given for? Because the Lord loves me. I'm His favorite. Yes, in a way. But even that has to be connected with a grand story, or you'll lose it. Or you'll lose it. You will lose orientation. What am I doing? That's a question every people that work eventually ask himself, right? You work, you go to work 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, and eventually you ask like, well, why am I doing this? Is it just to pay the bills? No, it has to be more than just pay the bills. That's a privilege, actually, to be able to ask that question. But again, the Lord has been very clear. This is my word. This is something that I'm doing. I'm doing because of their weakness, not your righteousness. Verse 6. So you should understand that it's not because of your righteousness that Adonai your God is giving you this good land to possess. For you are a stiff-necked people. Ooh, that sounds harsh. Remember, then he goes to say, I'm not going to read it for time's sake. But he goes to say, remember what?
Never forget.
Yeah. Never forget how you provoke Adonai your God in wrath in the wilderness when they were doing the tablets. And the Lord has to say, like Moses, meeting is over. You need to get down. These guys are already made of a calf. And they're worshiping. These guys are already lucid. So why do you have to remember that? If you think about family history, we don't tend to remember a lot of the bad things. Like, no, let's just let that pass. Or sometimes you grow up in a family that all they remember is the bad things. But that happens too. But he's saying actually remember that. Why? It humbles our heart. It humbles our hearts. But also rises up the grace and mercy of our Lord. I was telling you about the Japanese story. The way the government made them left their faith was not through torture, because they knew that in Japanese history, in Japanese culture, suicide is actually honor. To be murdered because of your faith, that will be martyrdom. And that is actually something very honorable. So they were like, we cannot press through that. How can we make them leave their faith? So they come up with a very, very smart and evil plan. Evil plan of making them have a very shameful life, but alive. Not dying, that will give them honor, but give them very shameful life. And they developed something called fumie. I don't know if you have heard about this. Fumie is a stone, a carved stone, with images of Yeshua or Mary or the apostles. And they will put it in the floor, and they will make a step on them and leave in shame. Because for them, if they didn't do it, they will kill them. But a lot, in order to avoid that, they step, so they will have to live from that moment on with the shame that I publicly step on the face of Yeshua. And stuff like that. So, that's something that you will never want to remember, right? But at the same time, you hear all the stories of how the Lord gave forgiveness to many of them. And how He restored, and how He kept restoring and building them in the midst of that dark age. And you can see the faithfulness of the Lord. Go with Java. Ve con Java. Okay. Llévala, por favor, mamá. Sorry. He wants to go to a restaurant. Can you give me a 1 minute just to take him really fast? Really? Acompáñate también para acá. Sorry. Oye, divina.
Are you rainy? But affecting you water? Now?
I see the off the church on Monday.
Monday you go,
Yeah, Monday morning.
to the meeting with the doctor.
It's the surgeon that my lawyer sent me to see.
Oh, the lawsuit?
Yes. Yeah, he sent me to the
They
doctor.
they wouldn't take it if they didn't have a case, right?
Yes. Now that they were ready to test.
So we started to process it. It's time to process it.
Yeah, it's ready to file.
Sorry. What time is it? Okay. Gracias. Sorry, thank you.
No problem.
So, my point in this is like when you remember those things, you're not remembering your failures. It's a very awesome opportunity to remember the amazing grace of God. His amazing, amazing grace that sustains us. And eventually you get to chapter 10 that says like, and I love this part because honestly, I don't know why I didn't grow up with this understanding when I was studying. I always thought the first one were written by the Lord, and Moses wrote them. The second ones now are Moses written. But then you read this, it says, verse 4, chapter 10, like the first inscription, Adonai wrote on the tablets the 10 words. And then he established the Levites to be those who are going to be intermediators. There you go, intermediators of this blessing that is his presence with them. And to finish this part so we can do the other two, I want to read verse 16 of chapter 10 that says, circumcise the foreskin of your heart, therefore, and do not be stiff-necked anymore. For Adonai your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great, mighty, and awesome God who does not show partiality or take a bribe. He enacts justice for the orphan and widow and loves the outsider, giving him food and clothing. Therefore, love the outsider, for you were outsiders in the land of Egypt. Adonai your God will fear. You will fear him, you will serve, to him you will cling, and by his name you will swear. He's talking about full allegiance. Full allegiance. And will that stop with that generation? Of course not. Ledor vador, from generation to generation. It says in chapter 11, verse 2, and you should know this day that it was not to your children who knew or saw the discipline of Adonai, your God. Your children will know not about Egypt because they were not there. They were not there. It is your, verse 7, it is your own eyes that have seen every mighty deed that Adonai has done. But then on verse 18 says, set these words of mine in your heart and in your soul. You are to bind them as a sign on your hand and on the frontlets between your eyes. You are to teach them to your children. Makes the connection. That we saw it last week, the Shema. Talk to your children. Now he's saying, like, you saw it. You live it. Now speak it to them. Speak to them what? The commandments? What did I share at the beginning of this class that we were talking with the little ones, the 9 and 10? 2 words. Questions and stories. Our job as parents is to provoke them to do questions and to respond with stories. Stories and more stories. Where are we hiding that? Oh. When I was 20 years old, I didn't know the Lord. And you get an opportunity. It's beautiful. Why do we do this? Why are we praying? Why we don't do this that my friends do? Why do we do this that my friends don't? And stuff like you get this question and it's beautiful. Okay. So when I hear this part, if I'm putting in Acts, in scenes, this is the part of the plan, the heart. But then we get to the Isaiah part. That is Isaiah, I think it was 49. I have it here. It is Isaiah 49, 14 to 51. I put to this section the title, The Reminder. So the first one was the plan, or the heart. And Isaiah is the reminder. And it starts with verse 14, but Zion said, Adonai has forsaken me, Adonai has forgotten me. But then the Lord responds, can a woman forget her nursing baby, or lack compassion for a child of her womb? Even if these forget, I will not forget you. And then he starts proclaiming beautiful, beautiful verses. Chapter 51 says, listen to me, look to the rock, look to Abraham, for Adonai will comfort you. And start speaking all these beautiful words. What is the prophet Isaiah being inspired with? The great story. One clue that I used to teach for understanding the prophets, a simple clue, is like the prophets are not talking about whatever topic. They have a very specific framework. The covenants. And if you know the covenants, then you can tell on which one they're standing on. So when they say repent because this is going to happen to us, who are they standing on? Moses. Chapter 28, 29. When they say this is happening to us because of what we're doing, repent, they're staying on Moses. But also when the prophet says, do not feel that the Lord has forsaken you, he's standing on Abraham, right? And I'm doing this is not literally, there are crossovers, but also what else did the prophet say? Repent, that's one of their main messages. Repent and return. The second one, you are not forsaken. The Lord has not abandoned you, as you think. And the third, the Redeemer, the Son of David, will come and restore us. If you have these three simple concepts, you can be able to navigate the prophets a lot more. And eventually there's a fourth topic. Not only the Messiah will guide us, he will change our hearts and fill us with his Spirit. And that's when we get New Covenant in the Old Testament. So this is the reminder, but according to the great story, this is going to happen. The nations, we get some verses. I'm doing this very fast because I want to spend the last 20 minutes on Acts. But I want you, if you read it, you can see that it's speaking about the nations, speaking about Israel, it's speaking about all the big narrative. So remember. Finally, this is where I want to spend most of our time. Acts 7. Acts 7, when I was in Bible school, I think I mentioned here that I got into Bible school without knowing there was Father, God, and Holy Spirit. So I came very green to Bible school. Most people were way beyond ahead what I was thinking. They were like quoting verses, and they knew how to use these, and I had to go to a store to get one of these and stuff like that. It was hard to catch up when I started in the Bible school. But when I got to chapter 7 of Acts, which was a book that I will say it was the first book that caught my attention. Like truly, caught my heart, not just my attention. But I got to Acts 7, and I saw Stephen giving this speech. And for years, I believed the lie that this speech was only possible as a miracle. Like nobody speaks like that. Nobody can speak with that much like sequence and clarity, and that was just like so supernatural for me. I always thought that. Until many years later, I started getting to the Jewish roots of our faith. I started reading that, and I started getting to the Messianic movement and get to understand the covenants. And for the first time, I was like, oh, I get it. Oh, I get it. You can actually have a framework to talk about this book in however minutes you want. I used to put this test to my students. I won't put it to you, right? At the beginning of our course, I will say, you have to be able to explain me the whole story in 1 minute, 5 minutes, and 30 minutes. And at the end, one of their final tests was that they have to be prepared because they're going to be called out, but they don't know if they're going to have to present it in 1 minute, 5 minutes, or 30 minutes. But if you are able to present and have it that way, like, hey, the other day, a person here in Kansas City that doesn't know the Lord at all was invited to a Catholic wedding, and he approached me and said, like, hey, I need help. My daughters asked me, why is this different than the other ones, and how do we got into this and all that? And I couldn't give him an answer. I'm like, okay, memory, please work. I said, like, okay, I'll give you a 3 minutes answer. And I tried to connect all the way from Yeshua to our time in 3 minutes. You have to have a framework in order to accomplish that. You have to have a framework to do it. But honestly, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Because there's a phrase I learned here in the States, you don't miss the forest by the trees, something like that, you said, right? Don't miss the forest by the trees. So you don't get entangled with the trees when you understand the forest. So Stephen is talking to Israel, very different than the speech that Paul gives to the Greeks, where he has to start, I'm going to tell you about the God that you don't know. And he goes all the way to creation. When you're speaking to a people that already know the Lord, you're telling them return. When you're speaking to people that has no clue of their God, you have to go to creation. But can you tell the great story? Do you know it that much? That's a question I want to bring to us. How well do we know the great story of the Lord? Because of teaching this, I've noticed that most people can articulate the first 35 years, 40, 50 years of Christianity, and then our last 30, 40, 50 years. Usually we have like a century that we can quote. This happened to Yeshua, this happened to the apostles, and then this happened after Reformation, and this happened right now. Bam, bam, that's our story. Like, wow, that works. Not that much, has a lot of holes. How do we connect it? How do we connect it? We need that story. That's something I felt sharing today very strongly. We need to have that story accurate, like fluent in our language, so we can express it according to our audience. Are we talking to Israel? Why Messiah? Why Messiah? Why? I don't get it. Why Jesus? Remember my Hebrew teacher was like, that is Greek religion. And I'm like, where do I start? Where do I start? You need to go back and do their scriptures. But Stephen starts by going through everything we have been going. Brothers and fathers, listen. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia. Before he lived in Haran, he said to him, leave your country and your relatives and come here to the land that I will show you. And he starts talking about Genesis 12. He talks about Egypt. He talks about the covenant in Genesis 17. But mostly, eventually at verse 20, he transitions to Moses. And says, at this time Moses was born extraordinary before the Lord. And, and tells the story of Moses. But then, verse 35. This Moses, whom they rejected, saying, who has appointed you as ruler and judge, is the one whom God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. In verse 37, this is the Moses who said to Bnei Israel, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your prophets. So in order to understand this speech, we need to see chapter 6, the accusations. Verse 11 says, they secretly instigated men into saying, we have heard him speaking blasphemous words against Moses and against God, and then against Yeshua and the temple and the Torah. So Stephen goes on to say, like, oh, you don't want to believe these because you believe in Moses? Let me help you out. Let me tell you what Moses said. Yeshua did the same. Do you remember? If you really follow Moses, you will believe in me. They were like, nah, you're too young. You are too young. But again, the beauty of this, and I believe the Messianic community has this gift and responsibility to share the grand story to the whole body of Messiah. We have a lot to learn, yes sir, a lot to learn in the Messianic community. But we have one richness that is very clear. We can proclaim the bigger story so people can know where they belong. Where they belong. So I call this, because I put it Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Deuteronomy was the plan. Isaiah was the reminder. Acts, I put it, it has begun. It has begun. But why is it not peace in the world? Okay, let me tell you. Why did he have to die? Today in the morning, somebody, very little on my side, asked me why he has to die. It's beautiful. It's like, oh my goodness. That's the moments we're waiting for. How well do we know the story? We need it. You get to a pastor and say like, oh, we're growing, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're reaching, we're doing it. It's like, I love it. How well do you understand the big narrative? Because it's definitely not the narrative of Church ABC. Right? I'm glad Church ABC and CDE and all these are happening, of course. But how well do you know your part in the bigger role? It just aligns our heart back of saying, this is not my story. This is not my church. These are not my children, ultimately. We're part of a bigger story. Lord, your kingdom come, your will be done. I want to pause here to interact with you guys. I said I want to hear you. I haven't give you any moment to speak. But I want to hear you guys. I hear this. I don't know if in the United States you have this joke, but in Mexico we have the joke that we say, you said Act 1 and you said something. Act 2, Act 3. What's the name of the play? You have that kind of joke in here? So, and you make it a joke. So you describe 3 scenes and then you add what's the name of the play, and usually you have a joke. But when I was preparing this, I felt like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 was the name of the play. Honestly, that response is very important. What is the grand narrative we all fit in? And I close with this quote that I always said. there's a big story in which all the rest of the stories make sense. So I want to hear your thoughts, hearts, opinions, questions, takeaways, insights. We have 3 beautiful portions, and also we have Hebrews, but I didn't brought it in today. But it also speaks about Abraham and speaks about this part.
I have
Yes, sir.
Kind of question. Why do we call it a story when we know that it's all real life events that happened throughout history?
That's good. So remember I started with the book Epic?
Yes.
He makes kind of that challenge, like, are we creating a God narrative because we like these kind of narratives? Or are we creating all these kind of narratives, believers and unbelievers alike, because it's integrated in our nature? So I will say the fast response will be, it could be semantics. I can understand why we can call it like that. Reality is also a story. If I told you a story in my life, it's a story. And it's reality. Probably have a few accents here and there that I'm gonna add like a movie just to make sense and connect the dots. But stories are real. I love, for example, how Tom Blake and his class, he has like from garden to garden narrative. I love to see like new frameworks. I love it. Help me make so much sense. And you see he has actually a picture, and it's like a circle. And when you see it, it's so simple that it's like, oh, makes sense. Makes so much sense. I can bring this picture to a conversation and have a full dialogue for weeks or months. Because there's a framework. Most of us, for example, like I confess, when I started in Bible school, I didn't have framework for most of the things. So how do you fit all this information? You can't. So what do? We end up taking just the morality of the spots. Because we don't have the framework to fit the whole thing, so we just take the morality of the stuff. But why do we call it story? I think stories can be real. Yes.
So it's interesting because I was watching a lecture this week about the connection between theology and history by a very famous theologian who is, well, it doesn't matter who it is, but we would disagree with him on some certain points, but this particular lecture was very good. And he was talking about the importance of kind of what you're saying is like the importance of understanding history through story even, and to help us understand theology, because that's what we're doing here, right? Like that's this like ending up at Acts 7, which I also very deeply love.
Oh yeah.
I love Acts 7 so much.
Yes.
But it's like when you read it after having spent time studying Torah, studying the whole Tanakh, it's like there's so much richness to it. Like it's a good story. It's a good speech.
Oh, yeah.
No matter what. But if you have all that history behind it, it's amazing. And so but in this lecture he was talking about like really like history, we all have a lens, right? We all have a worldview. We're all interpreting events through something.
Yeah.
Through it, and it's like, and we're constantly having that formed, right? And like we are intentionally trying to have our worldview formed by Scripture and by the Lord.
Yeah.
But whether or not you believe it, everybody has a worldview,
Yeah.
and so everybody is looking back at history through a lens, and we're all it's all coming through a filter. There's no way around it. There's no such thing as an objective view of history. As hard as you try, there's no such thing.
Yeah.
Yes, there are facts and things, but how we understand those facts is always coming through a lens.
Yeah.
Always. And so, but he was making this point of like, so that's why over time, as history continues, and the more that we learn, the more that we uncover through archaeology, through different discoveries and things like that, it changes our perspective. And so he calls it the shifting sands of history. And he's like, that's actually okay.
Yeah.
But the point is, yes, history is real events, but it's also, like you're saying, I'm really just saying everything you said in a little bit of through a different
That's great.
channel here, but it's this idea that that history is story, and narrative comes through history. Like we develop narratives based on history and based on these events because that's how we learn, right? We learn like your point is questions and stories.
Yes.
We learn through stories. We communicate ourselves. We get to know each other through stories, and so story is a method, and that's why it's important to understand the different ways even that Scripture communicates through stories, through narrative, through different things like that.
Yes.
So I just think it's interesting that all the things that you're bringing out and so I'm just sitting here thinking about watching this lecture this week about this and the importance of having history and theology together, and how much they need each other.
They need each other.
And so it's really good. And the other thing, if you don't mind if I
Go
say
for
one
it,
more
go for
thing.
it.
The other thing I've been thinking as you've been talking, even going back to the Deuteronomy passages, of going back to the point where it's talking about, it says that Adonai will love you and bless you and multiply you, and you were connecting that back to the garden.
Yeah.
And what I think is so interesting, and what I've seen, like kind of the common thread through all of the passages we've looked at, is this partnership with the Lord to bring about everything that He's promised and commanded. Because in the garden, that's the commandment, right?
Oh,
to
yeah.
Adam and Eve is be fruitful and multiply. So we get to Deuteronomy, and He's saying, I'm going to multiply you.
Fulfill.
And we have all these other passages that's like the Lord opens the womb and the Lord brings forth life and the Lord, but He commanded Adam and Eve. And so it has to be this partnership with the Lord.
That's amazing. That's
Like
cool.
all of these covenants are about partnership with the
Yes.
Lord. That's, because He wants His presence to be among us.
Yes.
And that's even what Stephen's bringing out. He's like, you are the ones who killed the prophets. You killed everyone who came in the name of the Lord. Why? And it's like all your fathers did that. Why would you be any different? And of course, they
did it.
they did it
Yeah.
again. But it's just this whole, because it's this. I feel like part of what Stephen is trying to provoke is like you have to partner with the Lord. He's trying to point out these blind spots that there are these people who are God's people are actually coming against Him, and He's like calling them up to partner with the Lord
Oh yeah.
and His heart. And so that was one of the common themes I was seeing through everything that you kind of were bringing out today, is just like we're called, like God has a plan, there's an inheritance, and He's commanded all these things, but the point is for all of them to come out through partnership with the Lord.
I love it what you're saying. Like, that's so important. Like, we're being invited to partner to actually accomplish. Again, it's not on our mind, but just partner with me. And the part of the Gospels actually talks about that. When Gamaliel tells them, like, it's Acts, a few chapters before, when Gamaliel says, like, hey guys, watch out what you do to these guys.
Mm-hmm.
I love how he said it. He's actually pondering what Stephen is confronting them. If they are from God, you're going to end up fighting God Himself. And if they're from men, don't worry, they'll rise and die. Like, they will come and go. So watch out. In other words, make sure you are in tune with the Lord. That is huge. That is huge. Make sure you are in tune with the Lord. Check your hearts. Oh, that's so good. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. And yeah, history. Another one that I love is beauty. So stories is one thing because we don't learn in facts. Not everyone. A lot of people do like bullet points, but stories and beauty. Have you ever been at a cathedral, like an old cathedral or an Orthodox church? Like, you enter, if you ever happen to be in Vienna, Italy, you enter that and it's full of images everywhere, and it's just like, wow, what is this? Suddenly you are part of the story. Part of the story. I think our time is up. But thank you so much. I hope the Lord keeps speaking to all of us about this grand story. And it is so in tune and so reachable to our minds and hearts that we can access and see things accordingly to that big story. May we speak with the boldness that Stephen spoke.